Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we are diving into a topic that honestly might be near to some of you listening. We are talking about sperm DNA fragmentation, and I think it's safe to say that this could be like a huge missing piece of the puzzle for people who are maybe struggling to conceive.
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. I think we're going to try to really break this down for everybody and give you a clear understanding of what sperm DNA fragmentation is, why it matters so much when it comes to actually getting pregnant, and then ultimately, what we can do about it based on all the information we have in front of us.
Perfect. So let's just get right into it. Sperm DNA fragmentation, it sounds pretty complicated, but like, what is it in like layman's terms?
So in really simple terms, you can think about it as damage to the DNA inside the sperm cells. So literally like breaks or tears in the genetic code of the sperm.
So then, like, I guess it kind of changes the whole picture of like getting pregnant because I think most people, I mean, I definitely thought this, thought that as long as the sperm gets to the egg, then you're good. But DNA fragmentation kind of like throws a wrench in that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a sperm with fragmented DNA can still technically reach the egg and even fertilize it. But if that damage is significant enough, it can actually prevent the sperm's DNA from properly like unwinding
Oh,
and
wow.
merging with the egg's DNA. So even if fertilization happens, you're not necessarily in the clear. Those like very first steps in the embryo's development can already be compromised.
Wow. So it's not just about getting there, it's about the quality of what is getting there. That is so interesting. So the main takeaway here is that even if fertilization happens, it's not a guarantee that things are going to proceed smoothly if there's all this damage.
Exactly. And the damage actually doesn't stop there. It can impact the development of the embryo itself.
Oh, I see. Okay. So
Yeah.
like how does that work then?
Well, the egg actually has some ability to repair damage to the sperm's DNA.
Okay.
But if the damage is too extensive, the embryo might not develop normally. It can lead to like errors in cell division, have difficulty developing, and ultimately it results in a lower quality embryo that is less likely to be successful.
So it sounds like we're talking about not just fertilization, but like the entire early stages of development. And then on top of that, there's the implantation step too, right? Where the embryo needs to actually attach to the uterus. Like, does DNA fragmentation affect that as well?
It does, even embryos that make it to the blastocyst stage, which is like a later stage of development, they can still face challenges if the sperm's DNA was damaged, because subtle defects from that fragmentation can actually affect those cells that are responsible for interacting with the uterine lining. And they can even disrupt the signals that are needed for successful implantation.
So even a strong embryo, so to speak, might not implant correctly. That's crazy. And this is all on top of an increased risk of miscarriage too, right?
Unfortunately, that's true. Higher levels of sperm DNA fragmentation are associated with a higher risk of miscarriage, especially in the first trimester. And this is true for both natural conception and even with IVF or other assisted reproductive technologies.
Oh, wow. So this is like a major factor at like every stage. And it seems like the sources were saying that it's not just happening in isolation either. Like sperm DNA fragmentation can actually indicate that there are other things going on with the sperm as well.
Absolutely. If you're seeing high levels of DNA fragmentation, it can often be a sign of broader problems. Things like oxidative stress, which is basically an imbalance in the body between harmful molecules and protective antioxidants.
Right.
Or there could be problems with the sperm's own mechanisms for repairing DNA.
Yeah.
So it's really important to understand that all of these things can be interconnected.
Okay, so we've talked about what it is and why it matters, but what are some of the things that can actually cause this DNA damage in the first place?
So the main culprits that our sources highlight are oxidative stress. That seems to be a major one. Problems with the sperm's own DNA repair mechanisms also play a role.
Uh-huh.
And then there's the kind of lifestyle factors that I think a lot of people are aware of, but maybe don't associate with this specific issue, like aging, being overweight or obese, and exposure to heat or certain chemicals. All of these can contribute to DNA fragmentation.
And it's interesting because you mentioned earlier that sperm can't really repair themselves very well. Right.
Exactly. Mature sperm cells, they lack the same robust DNA repair capabilities that other cells have.
Yeah.
So once that damage is done, it's pretty much there.
So it's like a ticking time bomb in a way.
Kind of, yeah.
So I know a lot of these things in fertility are measured. Like, are there any numbers or thresholds with DNA fragmentation that people should be aware of?
Yeah, there's actually a specific measurement called the DNA Fragmentation Index, or DFI. And research suggests that when the DFI is above 20 to 30%, that's when it can significantly impact a man's ability to conceive.
But
This is actually particularly relevant in the context of IVF and ICSI because studies have shown that higher DFI levels are often linked to lower success rates with those procedures. And in some cases, it can even be a factor in unexplained infertility.
wow, that's really good to know. So this is all pretty heavy stuff, but it sounds like there are some things that people can do if they find out that they have high sperm DNA fragmentation. What does our information suggest?
Yeah, there are definitely some potential approaches. I mean, like we were saying earlier, a lot of it comes down to addressing those underlying causes. So if oxidative stress is a big factor, for example, then antioxidant supplements might be helpful.
Right, so lifestyle changes would be a big one too, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And then our sources also mentioned a really interesting resource. They highlighted the Berkeley Center for Reproductive Wellness. They offer things like acupuncture and herbal medicine as potential ways to reduce sperm DNA fragmentation. So those are some more alternative options that people might want to consider.
Okay, that's great. So if our listeners want to check that out, what's the best way to reach them?
You can visit their website at www.berkeleycenter.com or give them a call at 212-685-0985.
Perfect. We will definitely link all that in the show notes as well. So I guess, kind of bringing it all together, what would you say is like the biggest takeaway for our listeners today?
I think the key takeaway is that sperm health goes way beyond just the number of sperm and how well they swim. The integrity of the sperm's DNA is a critical factor, and thankfully, it might be a factor that you can actually modify or improve.
Yeah, and it's a factor that most people don't even know about. So really just understanding this is the first step.
Exactly.
So for our listeners out there who may be on this fertility journey, given all the information we just talked about regarding the potential impact of sperm DNA fragmentation and all the different ways to potentially address it, what further questions does this bring up for you in your understanding of fertility and reproductive health? This is something that's really worth thinking about.
Absolutely. I encourage all the listeners to really dive deep into this topic and see how it fits into their own personal journeys.
It's a whole new world that's opening up.
It is.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on The Deep Dive. We will see you next time.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be here.